Hello and welcome. This is Safe Travels and Good Light. I'm Carol Schiraldi from Carol's Little World. So, what's with the phrase safe travels and good light anyway? I've always heard the nautical phrase of good luck is really a blessing, fair winds and following seas. I thought that as a photographer, we kind of need our own phrase. So, I started using the phrase safe travels and good light. When anybody departs on a voyage, if they put on Facebook, hey, I'm leaving to go shoot, whatever, or just even sometimes if they're going across town and they tell me they're traveling, I always wish them safe travels and good light. I have a lot of photographers friends who travel a lot, so I wind up frequently saying this. Over the years, it's just kind of stuck. I've always said safe travels and good light. And then I started, or I guess as I've traveled more myself, I wanted to create a book of my travel photography at some point, and I thought this would make a great title for my books. So my upcoming book on travel photography will be called Safe Travels and Good Light. So I for the Austin Studio Tour, I was lucky enough to be included in the Austin Studio Tour this year. Um, so I thought these are some images from my. I would include some of these images from my upcoming book. Okay, come on, silly thing. There we go. Okay. So this is the first series I'm going to show you are from Iceland. I was lucky enough to travel to Iceland and to embark on a journey to what they call a glacial lagoon, which is actually a lagoon full of icebergs. Um, and I was lucky enough to sail into the far reaches of the lagoon where the icebergs are very large. But I also ended up making a circumnavigation of Iceland. I started out in Reykjavik and flew to the northern part of Iceland, and then I took Iceland is an island, and it's got like what they call a ring road. It's a road that goes around the sort of the outer edges of the island. The center of Iceland is mostly ice, and it's very hard to get through. But I managed to fly up north and then circumnavigate sort of Iceland back down to Reykjavik. And I went through some of the backcountry that was pretty almost uninhabitable as well, pretty empty. So it was kind of a really unique trip. And this was what these are some images from the glacial lagoon. Um, we had to sail on these amphibious vehicles to first set out on the lagoon, and then we disembarked and jumped into zodiacs and sailed around the icebergs on the smaller zodiacs, because it's difficult to navigate. The waters, as you can imagine, is freezing cold. Um, and I thought it was very interesting because the skies up there are the color palette in Iceland is very unusual. The earth is like a black sand almost because of the volcanic activity. And because it's so far north, the skies I found to be almost a violet color. There's sort of this like purple color. And I was really fascinated by the colors in the ice itself. It just was, all different colors, um, blues, pinks. You can see streaks of dark marks where, um, dirt and sand and things over the years have gotten into the glaciers and whatnot. So it's just a fascinating environment to photograph and to be near. And here you can see another one of the glaciers, the icebergs. Um, this one has some browns and pinks as well as some blues. As you get closer to the ocean, what happens is the icebergs actually, when they meet the salt water, they dissolve and break up, and they actually form sort of, it looks almost like diamonds on the beach. And this is a larger iceberg along the shoreline. There are also some smaller ones. It looks, you'll be walking on a black sand beach and all of a sudden see what looks like diamonds on the beach. And it really, what it is just this ice when it hits the waves and the salt water, it breaks up and cracks into a million pieces, and there's just shards of ice on the beach. It's really fascinating. When I was there, the temperature was maybe in the 50s, and so you needed a jacket, but it wasn't freezing. But you're walking along, and there's just these blocks of ice in random places. Iceland's a very interesting environment, I'll have to say. I would love to go back someday. One thing too about Iceland, the people really make it special. I think there's something about a people that live in this kind of environment with this wild color palette and icebergs and, you know, the Vikings and whatnot. Their stories that they tell are just so fascinating. I think Iceland, of all the places I've been, it's people have the strongest resolve and some of the best stories I've heard. It just was a treat to get to talk to and meet some of the people, some of the locals. So if you ever do wander up that way, try to make friends with the locals, because they really do have interesting stories to tell. And this is also from Iceland. This is a waterfall. I normally do not shoot waterfalls. I did a blog post about this recently. Not that I don't like them. I think a lot of people shoot them, and I always find a hard way to shoot them in sort of an artistic way. And in Iceland, I had to shoot a couple just because there's more waterfalls than people in Iceland. And they're just so, there's just so many of them, and they're everywhere. And I tried to challenge myself to shoot them a little differently, to make them look different and, you know, maybe not what you would expect from a usual waterfall. It's a hard challenge, but, you know, I don't know if I even am up to it, but I tried. So I thought I would include this one. This is my take on a waterfall shot. Now this is in China. So moving on, I was also lucky enough to visit mainland China. I went to a city called Guilin and the outskirts of Guilin. Outside of Guilin, there's a saying in China, the Guilin scenery is the most beautiful under heaven. And that's because they have these karst mountains in the distance there. They're really very beautiful. You can see them here. It's just mountains that are, you know, kind of follow you around as you move about the city. Guilin is a city on a river, and the mountains are near the river. So you get these beautiful, you can sail and you get these beautiful mountainous backdrops. This type of scenery like this is on the currency, on the Chinese currency. The 20 yuan currency has the it's such a wonderful place, really. They actually sail this river with bamboo rafts, and you can go up and down the river and enjoy the mountain scenery. It's very pretty. It's sort of a, you know, nice little retreat area, but it's a very pretty landscape to get to see. This is our reflection in the water. This was actually in the catalog for East. This for Austin Studio Tour. Sorry. This is actually the image they picked for the catalog and the virtual show this year. This is a reflection in the water of the Karst Mountains as printed on Japanese paper with texture particulates in it. I hand print these myself, and so they're limited edition prints. But this is the reflection in the river from the karst formations. And then there's a place called the Dragon's Backbone, which is rice paddies that are up at Longshan rice terraces up in the mountains surrounding Guilin also. And there's a little village up there. This is the village. These are the architecture of the village. They have these wooden houses with the sort of tile roofs that you see here. These little villages were built into the rice terraces. It's kind of fascinating to see them. It's a different little environment up in the sky. This is an area where there's a lot of ethnic specific groups in China that come together. Guilin is home to about 4 or 5 different groups. And the ones that live up here have, you know, they have different clothing, they wear these little woolen hats. They make these woolen hats for themselves and things. And so it was interesting to see that they still kind of live the same way. the rice terraces, I think, have been there for 650 years, and the people that live in this little village have kind of lived the same way for almost that time, I would say. So it was interesting to see the people in the village, and also the architecture, and again the mountains and the rice terraces themselves. This is one of the temples in Guilin. I was lucky enough I had a local guide, and I was lucky enough to be able to explore the city without having to go to a lot of the touristy place. I did get to some of the touristy place, but this was a sort of a hidden temple. It's built actually into one of the karst formations. There's a cave, and they put the Buddhist shrine in the cave under the temple. One thing that happened to me, we had these cell phones that they had given us to keep track of us, I guess. And, so we wouldn't, if we got lost, we could call our guide for help. And for some reason, our phones would keep going off every hour almost on the hour. And it would sing this little song like, nee ha, nee ha, kind of very loudly, sort of for a second or two. And of course, I get in this beautiful temple in this beautiful cave, and it's very quiet. And I'm like, I wonder if I can take photographs, and there's nobody around. So I just sort of quietly slip in, and I'm trying to be very respectful, and I put my camera bag in a very decent little place, and I've got my camera on quiet mode. I'm trying to take a picture of the beautiful Buddhas and everything. And right in the middle of this cave, where probably the most acoustical, the worst spot or the best spot for acoustics, my phone goes off, and I think the whole temple just shook with this, nee ha, nee ha. I was just like, oh my God. The monks started laughing at me, fortunately. So I don't think I got kicked out of the temple. I think they got maybe perhaps a joke for the day. But this dog guards the front of the temple, and I have to say he's not very good at stopping cell phones from getting in. But other than that, I think he wards off evil spirits. So we'll give him props for that. And this is a golden Buddha that was in the 7-star park in Guilin. In the park, it's like a big park like Zilker Park. They have a temple in there, and in the temple there's something called a wishing tree. And I thought this was really interesting, because what it is you're supposed to write your wish down on a slip of paper and then sort of hang it to the tree, and you can hear the wishes blowing in the breeze as you do this. And I like to say, while I was photographing this Buddha, I heard the wishes of 1,000 visitors in the breeze. And so it's somewhat meditative. At first I thought, why am I writing a wish down? But then when I heard the wishing tree, it was just really interesting to hear the wishes, sort of very meditative to hear. If you've seen prayer flags before, that sort of thing, it's that meditative sound. I did find it to be meditative after spending some time there. So, and of course the Buddhas were really beautiful in 7-star park. They have a whole, they say it's a Buddhist temple. It's actually a pavilion. It's a teaching pavilion. So they had monks in training, and more than one building. It was probably 7 buildings, I believe, with the monks' quarters, and they had an incense cart sort of thing, and they had one room with, it had these giant gold men from the Buddhist scripture. And so this is the Buddha, but they had probably 11 or 12 other giant statues. So it was really kind of interesting to see. And this is from one of the more touristy areas. This is, excuse me, it's on Fur Lake. This is the Sun and the Moon Pagoda. So the Sun Pagoda is the bronze one you see on the left, and it's actually made entirely of bronze. I think there's a lot of facts about it. I'm sure I'm going to get some of them wrong, but it's one of the tallest pagodas in the world above water. And I think it's the only pagoda above a certain height that's made entirely of bronze. And it's a 9-story tall pagoda, and it's got a lot. Actually, the 2 pagodas are connected with a bridge under the water. So it was kind of interesting. While I went to this area, this is along the more touristy area, and when I was in China, it was actually my birthday. So they also have caves. They have a restaurant in a cave In China, they make something called baijiu, which is whiskey. It's Chinese whiskey. And the way they make it is they put it in these jugs and it ferments in the jug over time. So they bury it in this cave in these jugs and they paint the jugs and everything. It's sort of fascinating. And there's this one place you can go in the touristy area where it's a cave restaurant and you go into the cave and you can buy whiskey that's already been, they pull out and they show you the jugs and you can tour the back of the cave and see the jugs as, the fermenting and everything. And I thought it was really interesting because for my birthday, they gave me something called longevity noodles, which are I guess it was almost like chicken noodle soup, but it was these noodles that are very long. And the idea is if you eat them, is a tradition in China, you eat these longevity noodles on your birthday and you're supposed to live a long life from that. And then they also served me birthday cake, which is a tradition in the United States. It's a cake with frosting. So they gave me both the longevity noodles and the birthday cake and some baijiu. But we met the owner of the cave restaurant and he said his motto of the restaurant is your stories and my alcohol. And I thought that those were words to live by. So whenever I see this now, I think of your stories and I think the one on the left is your stories and the one on the right is my alcohol. But these are actually the sun and moon pagodas from Guilin. So now, let's see, back to Venice. This was actually shot. This is actually the back of my hotel. I actually studied photography for a wee bit of time at the Venice School of Photography. And I stayed in Venice at the hotel that you see here on the left. And it's very interesting because it did have a front door, but I guess I'm not sure which is front and which is back. It's a little hard to tell, but it was along a canal. And as you know, Venice is a canal city. One of the things I found about it was originally I had gone to Venice when I knew I was going to Venice. I thought, okay, I'm going to do a night photography thing and I'm going to make all the buildings look really spooky and scary at night. And as I went out among the buildings at night, I realized they were just too beautiful. They all had this beautiful golden glow. That sort of Tuscan gold is even in Venice. It's that gold, Renaissance gold sort of color. And I just found at night with the water and the reflections, the buildings were just bathed in this beautiful light. And my idea of doing spooky, scary buildings turned into this beautiful sort of dreamy buildings. I just abandoned the idea of doing anything spooky, which is fine. I mean, a lot of times that happens. We have one idea when we start out an art project and end up something completely different. I just take what comes, right? But I can remember as I was walking around, because I did stay in Venice. A lot of people go to Venice for the day and then leave. And so at night, it's a very different city than the day. And I had done a whole series of Venice at night. And I just thought it was really fascinating because like you would be walking around and a lot of times you'll hear people practicing. Like there was an opera singer that was there, a male tenor, and he was just outdoors practicing. And you'd be walking around in an environment like this and suddenly hear this beautiful opera coming from, down the canal. And I just thought this is just so incredibly Italian and so incredibly just an amazing environment to be in. And I mean, I got a lot of shots at night. I did a whole series of this at one point, and I probably should do something with this work, but I just every now and again I just pull it out, and I find it very relaxing. While I was there, it was actually pretty cold, but now I look at it and it just kind of warms me up because it's got that warm Venetian glow about it. It was a really beautiful environment. And this is another one. This is, of course, another one from Venice at night. This boat is actually owned by a family. They live in the house with sort of the green on the door on the right of the boat. And they light this boat up at night. It's their little, speedboat, I guess. And this was sort of 2 bridges down from my hotel, I guess you could say. And I just found the water to be really beautiful at night. The buildings had such a beautiful glow. It was just a lovely environment for photographing. Really, really stunning and really wonderful place to visit. And this is in the daytime. This is what the buildings look like in the daytime when they're not bathed in that beautiful glow at night. This is I call this arch reflections. There's a lot of archways and little balconies in Venice as well because of the cities are all built on the canal. So the architecture is just really interesting in Venice too, because of I guess the history of it. It hasn't really changed much over time. It's a city that's timeless. And it always had an interesting architecture to begin with. So it's just sort of aged in an interesting way. Um, so yeah, I love architecture, and it's hard sometimes to photograph architecture because you literally have to travel to get to it and to see it. And I was fortunate enough to spend some time in Venice and get to photograph some of the structures and the people too. You know, it's another place I've been where the food is great. It's an easy environment to photograph. It's easy to walk around. The buildings are lovely, and it can be frustrating lighting at times, but just from a photographer's point of view, but it's really a great place to photograph. So now moving on to Santorini. This one is from Greece. I had spent some time in Santorini. Um, I think this is Firostefani, little village of Firostefani. In Santorini, there's sort of a sunset wars. There's two cities, Fira and Ia, OIA, and they each compete to say who has a better sunset. The place I stayed in Santorini was Firostefani, which is sort of right in between the two. So I was sort of in the middle of the sunset wars, which if you don't know anything about Greek culture, you should never get in the middle of. It's kind of like standing between Athens and Sparta. It's not a good place to be. But having said that, I got some great sunsets, and this is actually a sunrise from my hotel with intentional camera move. I moved my camera around. You can kind of see that colors are. Santorini is also famous for its architecture. It's built along a caldera. It used to be one larger island, and volcano blew up, and the center of it sank. And then the edges now it's sort of crescent shaped, and the edges are all along cliffs that overlook the water because the center sort of sunk into the Aegean Sea once the volcano hit. And so they built these sort of caves. You can kind of see the building in the foreground is sort of an arch-shaped roof. They built these sort of cave buildings along the caldera of the volcano. And of course, being Greece, they have a lot of the blue and white domed churches. I think there are more. Iceland has more waterfalls than people. I think Santorini had more blue and white domed churches than people. And some of them are quite small. But this one in particular was a little bit larger. Some of them are tiny. They only hold 2 people. But it's a very picturesque place to visit too. And another place with great food. I've been lucky that I've been going to places with some great food and coffee too. So, and this is actually from Ia. This is a close-up detail of a door. You can see that sort of Santorini blue. A lot of white buildings there with blue trim. It's very common. And again, it's another place with really interesting architecture because it's built into that onto the side of cliffs basically, with a lot of arches and things and different color washes. It's a great little place to photograph. Here you can kind of see, you can actually see I think there's the waters in the background. You can kind of see the angle and the slope of the villages. This is actually the city of Ia, OIA, Ia, they pronounce it. And if you can see on the lower right hand of this image, there's what looks like vines. That's how they grow wine. The soil is not sufficient to grow wine. The grapes dry out. So what they do is they take, instead of growing them on arbors and things, they make these wreaths and they sort of bury them in the ground. They dig holes and put them in the ground so that grapes don't get melt, too hot. It keeps them cooler so they can actually get the wine. So the wine in Santorini is very different from other parts of the Mediterranean, like Italy or Spain or France, where they have arbors and they grow grapes above the ground. In Greece, in Santorini, they have to sort of bury them a little bit. So you see a lot of those wreaths is sort of a symbol of Greece as well. And here you can also see I think all the blue dome buildings are churches. You can get an idea for how many there are and how they kind of dot the horizon. Beautiful place to visit. This is the top detail of a church in Santorini. Again, they just have beautiful that white, and because it's on the Aegean, they just have beautiful blue skies and beautiful blue water and just really crisp white buildings. It's a great place for. I think the Pantone color of the year is blue and white, and you know, Santorini is the place to go for that. It's really is the land of blue and white. And this one was, again, a long exposure taken at night from the caldera looking down a little bit. This is again, this is like a on the zoom moment, but I just love again, the glow at night in Santorini was also really stunning. And you've got that blue sky, that really blue, you know, with the Aegean being that color, it just makes everything pop. So really pops a blue. Now this is moving on to Japan. This is actually an IMP design tunnel. That's the entrance to the Miho Museum, which is on the outskirts of Kyoto. It's also called the Museum in the Mountain. What happened was, I guess IMP was given an infinite budget, imagine that, and said, you know, hey, design a museum for us, you know, one that we really want, and just go to town kind of thing. And he came up with this design that he actually built the museum into a mountain. And he has a tunnel that you see here, and a bridge, a suspension bridge leading you in. It's like an approach to the museum. And then when you get to the museum, it's actually it's a beautiful building as well. I really enjoyed photographing. In fact, I did a series. I sat at one point on a bench, and I just looked up at the ceiling, and I did a series of ceiling tiles in the museum. And I realized I probably could do ceiling tiles for about a month. It really wasn't a place that, you could just sit there and the light would move and you get a different photo. And the same thing with this tunnel. This tunnel was just fascinating. There's these little lights along the edges of it, and it's arched, and there's lines on the ground, and there's, as people walk through it, you can get people moving through it, and the lights changing, and all of this is just, a simple tunnel. And that's not even in the museum yet. This is before you get to the bridge. It's like the pre-approach to the museum. So it was really fascinating, a really fascinating environment. I love architecture, and I really feel like when I see this photo too, I'm standing on the shoulder of giants, because I was lucky enough to photograph an IMP design, and it's really beautiful. This was in a little town. That's when I went to, this is also in Japan. I went to a place called Art Island, and this was a little town. We'd stopped there. This is another town built along canals in Japan. And it just was a very tranquil, beautiful place. You can see there's sort of I guess you'd call it a boat quay. It's sort of the edge on the left-hand side is like stone, and it allows you to climb into the rowboats. And I think from this shot, I was standing on a bridge overlooking the canals. We had stopped here to go to a museum, and I never made it into the museum. I ended up photographing the canals, and then I stopped for food, and I found this place that sold, I thought it was a restaurant. I guess it was a restaurant, but they ended up selling ice cream, like these ice cream sundaes. And I had this gigantic ice cream sundae, and then I wasn't hungry again for 3 days because it was so big. But yeah, it was interesting. This was a wonderful little town, little village. And there were sort of painters along the edges of the canals, painting the canals. I have some photographs of them painting them. And you could rent a rickshaw also, and the driver would take you up and down the pavement, the surrounding of the canals, and enjoy the view and whatnot. It was such a really quaint little village. This is in a temple in Japan, in Kyoto. A lot of the temples in Kyoto are said to, because they're near the mountains, they feel that they have sort of holy water. And so they have these little cups, and this allows you to drink from sort of the holy water. I don't know that people actually drink anymore from this, but they still keep the cups. Especially now with COVID, I don't know what's happening, but when I was there, it was pre-COVID, and I think you could maybe drink from the cups. I'm not sure. I did not, but I enjoyed the photographs. of the cups and the holy water, it's sacred, said to be sacred water, with special healing properties. So I thought that was interesting. This is while I was in Kyoto too. I had attended a tea. I went to a tea house, a tea ceremony, and I had opportunity to sit and have lunch with and photograph Maiko, which is a geisha in training. And I found out lots of information about the geisha culture, the geishas. This particular Maiko is 19 years old, and she's studying to be a geisha. She's in her training. For the geishas, they actually wear their robes are made of gold, actually gold leaf. And so while I was in Japan, I got to tour an artist studio who made the obi, which is the belt for the kimono, the robe she's wearing. He makes those individually, and those are also made of gold leaf. And we talked with her about that. She said she weighed, I think she weighed 92 pounds, and her kimono weighed like 60 pounds. So it was really an interesting. And we asked her, we said, does it get heavy? And she said, oh yes, and she said the one good thing about it was it had these really big sort of heavy sleeves, and she became a master at hiding things in her sleeves. And she said she could pull out, like, I think that we had a translator. So I think she was trying to say she could pull a kitchen sink from out of her left sleeve as she was eating or whatnot, because she had her sleeves were very large and she could become adept at hiding things. But basically the process of just getting made up in the morning takes her about 3 hours, and she has help. She has assistants that help her get into this heavy robe and this heavy obi and all the makeup and whatnot. But it was fascinating to see sort of the old Japan, the traditional ways. As part of the obi, also they wear a jewel. Is very expensive. In our guide told us the translation is basically what they call a walking house, because one of the jewels would maybe cost about like $250,000. So on the front of her obi is a jewel that is real jewels, like gemstones, and very expensive. And this is becoming a hardship for families that want to have their daughters become maikos and geishas, because they have to buy that basically. And so they kind of have to mortgage the house just to get this one little piece of the robe, piece of the costume, so to speak. And then the kimono itself and the obi, as I said, I visited a gold leaf artist who showed us how he made he makes the gold leaf by hand, and then they put it on a loom and they make the fabric out of his gold leaf designs. And it was just really interesting to see, how that is made, but that is also really expensive because it's a real gold leaf. So, and one interesting thing he said to us, he was showing us how he did the gold leaf, and he'd taken out all this just gold flakes and he had them on a table in his studio. And I said, wow, this is an expensive hobby. And he looked at me, he spoke English quite well, actually. He thought he didn't, but he spoke better than he thought. And he said to me, yes, very important, do not sneeze. And I thought that was probably also really good advice. If you ever decide to take up gold leaf, don't sneeze on it. It probably would cost you, a couple $1,000. But it's really interesting to see. And actually, before I switch sides, the screen behind her is actually also gold leaf as well. And I had kind of trouble photographing it because it reflects the light in an odd way, because the gold it's metallic, right? So it has these odd, so it made everything kind of orange in the room. I had to really play with the white balance a little to get everybody not looking like they had a fake spray on tan kind of thing. It was really interesting because usually when they have golden color screens, they're not actually real gold leaf. But this was taken in a tea house that was probably, again, probably 600 years old or some ridiculous, not 600, but close to it probably. And so very old building, and it had real gold leaf about, and it was just interesting to photograph in that environment. But great to get to see it. It was interesting to see that the modern day Maiko and geisha, how they get along. This was along the Philosopher's Path in Kyoto. There's a famous footpath, I guess you'd call it, called the Philosopher's Path, and it winds through some of the temples. And this is a lantern. I was lucky enough I went in early December, and we thought we were not going to get any autumn at all. And it turned out we were sort of there at the peak of autumn somehow. They had a late autumn that year. And so we got, everything was red. I got all the red maple leaves, and that was really interesting. And I got to walk along the Philosopher's Path with the red leaves, which was also really interesting. It's beautiful. Kyoto's a beautiful city, and in autumn especially, it's really beautiful. I imagine with the cherry blossoms, it would also be equally beautiful. But I almost am actually happy we went in the autumn, because the red leaves really just made it for me. We where I live in Austin, we don't have a lot of autumn, so it was difficult to, we don't get to see a lot of autumn leaves a lot of times. And so I was sort of dumped in this environment, and it was suddenly like everything was vibrant and red and true autumn. And I was like, wow, what's this? And of course, some of my friends from the north were like, oh, it's just red leaves. And I was like, ah. So I really enjoyed photographing the red leaves, but Kyoto is a beautiful city. I'd love to go back someday, regardless of time. So this is now moving on to another city I photographed. This is a colonial architecture from the city of Lima, Peru. I actually got to go to Lima. I went to a place called Miraflores, which is part of Lima's capital. It's outside of the capital district, but it's in Lima itself. Lima is kind of a sprawling city with different districts. And so I pretty much stayed in the Miraflores district, but I did get to the capital district and see the presidential palace and whatnot. I thought this was really interesting because the building had 3 different windows, basically. One arch, one rectangular, and one square. And it was really interesting. I love colonial architecture. It's one of the things I've shot Mexico a lot. I've shot, anywhere I can where there's colonial architecture. I love it. There's some places in the world. I love Japan. I loved Italy. I love Santa Fe, and I love Spanish colonial architecture. Those are, I guess, kind of my top favorites in terms of just architectural places. And Lima had a lot of colonial architecture. The Miraflores district, especially, is just all colonial houses. So it was great to just walk around and get to photograph there. And I'm very lucky I got to go there. Before I went to Peru, I didn't realize Peru was such a culinary capital of the world either. It really, it's on the map in terms of culinary. I think it's like one of the better cities. Like if you look at if you Google the best restaurants in the world, there's always one in the top 10 that's from Lima. It really is a culinary capital of the world. They have, one of the reasons is it's very near the equator, and they're right on the ocean, so they get a lot of fish. And in Lima, there are over 250 varieties of potato. They grow a lot of stuff because the mountains are nearby, and the ocean is nearby, and they just grow a lot of stuff. The growing season is very long. And so it's just really, the food was just phenomenal there. It's another place that I had no idea I was stepping into such great food, and wow, it was really a great place to visit. I did not go, a lot of people go to Machu Picchu and other places in Peru. I stayed within Lima and in the capital district in Miraflores, but I found there was enough to photograph there. I'm not as much a nature photographer. I would love to see Machu Picchu someday, but I do recognize it's kind of out in the boonies and it's almost a separate trip. So I was glad I got to go see Lima and Miraflores in the capital district. This is one of the shrines. This is San Francisco is the name of the shrine, and it is in the capital district of Lima. And it is, underneath it are catacombs, and they don't allow photography, but I was able to tour the catacombs. And I was with a guide, again, I speak Spanish, but I was with a guide when I went to Lima. And I was worried because I thought I really wanted to go see the catacombs, but I thought, oh, am I gonna like creep them out, or, and I'd become friends with my guide over my time there. So his name was Oscar. And so I said to him, I said, Oscar, I really want to go see the catacombs. Can you, like, is it okay if you don't want to see them? Can you just leave me and come back? And he said that he'd always wanted to see them, and he'd gone on a trip in school, like a field trip, and he didn't get to see them. They kept the kids out for some reason. I guess they were afraid they were going to steal all the bones or something. I don't know. So we went through the catacombs together in a group tour kind of thing, but it was really interesting. There's probably tens of thousands of bones underneath this structure, and it's a clone. This is actually not. This is in the presidential area, the capital center of Lima. And it was just really interesting to see the catacombs and go through them. I think it's one of the largest catacombs in the Americas. It was really big, and they had a lot of bones, and it was really interesting. So I really enjoyed that. I know it's a little weird thing to say, but the outside of the building, it's very colonial, and they had these carvings into the building. So it was really interesting. Great place to photograph, except for the catacombs. They didn't allow photography, but I'm glad I got to tour them. So I have a new video series coming up called Travels with Carol. It's debuted on YouTube. It's linked, if you go to my Austin Studio Tour page, there's a link to you can just hit play, and I think it'll play automatically the first video. The first video is on Guilin. I'll be adding additional videos for some of the work you've seen here. I'll be adding Iceland, the glaciers and the coast of Iceland, Venice, Santorini, probably Peru. Over time, I'll flesh out the places and the places I've been. There's some additional places I didn't include. I've got some work from Mexico, from Hawaii, from Whidbey Island, New Orleans. I like to travel a lot, and both in the States and outside. I just kind of picked some of the larger places that either made an impact on me, or just I had portfolios from them. So really enjoy. I hope we can travel again someday. And I really enjoyed pulling it together, pulling the work together. As part of the Austin Studio Tour, I'm doing a giveaway. You can enter at my link, Austin Studio Tour giveaway. Feel free to enter. I'm giving away a 16 by 16 inch square print that was picked specially for the Austin Studio Tour. And of course, for more of my work, you can see me on carolslittleworld.com. And there's if you click on the destinations picture, it's the picture of the Buddha. If you click on that, it'll take you to all the different destinations. And my website is print on demand, so you can print anything or view anything individually. Again, thanks for supporting the local arts in Austin. This is great. This is a wonderful thing that Big Medium is doing, helping us all out. And I guess with that, I'll turn it over if there are any questions. I should show my print before I forget. So I have, for the Austin Studio Tour, I have set up a store where I'm selling coasters. If you go to carolslittleworld.com, there is merchandise, and you can buy, there's I think 5 different varieties of coasters, so they're up there. And let me get my print. This is the print I'm auctioning as part of the giveaway. It's always hard to show this thing. It's a 16 by, I think I got all of it in the camera. It's a canvas wrap, gallery canvas wrap, so it's closed on the edges and everything, and it's wired and ready to hang. It's beautiful archival canvas, and it's one of my pieces. It's called Park Bench and Dream. I'm going to see if I can hold it up. I think that gets most of it. It's a little hard to say, but it's 16 inches by 16 inches, so you can kind of see my head how it fits. And that'll be auctioning off next weekend as part of the Austin Studio Tour wrap up, which I've scheduled. And I've sold some artwork already as part of the tour. So if anybody has purchased anything, it should be either on the way to you, or if you've bought a limited edition print, I'll be sending those out either this week or next week after the tour is completed. So with that, are there any questions? Okay, well, thanks for coming out. This is Carol from Carol's Little World. Look for Travels with Carol on YouTube. And thanks again. Enjoy the art from the rest of the tour.